نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله تعالى فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدًا عبده ونبيه ورسوله. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. ثم أما بعد، فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. ثم أما بعد. Dear respected brothers and sisters in Islam, I wanted to begin this brief khutbah inshallah with an incident that occurred during the time of our Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This was around the 5th year after Nubuwah. So you're talking 5 years after the revelation of Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. Throughout that time of Iqra, from this very moment that I'm about to explain to you all, the Muslims were going through a very, very tough situation. And the Muslims were going through boycotts, as we know in the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where all of the Muslim businesses, the Quraysh and the Kuffar and the polytheists of Mecca were not buying from the Muslims because they didn't like them. In fact, Abu Lahab, the famous uncle of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, had his sons married to 2 of the daughters of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Ruqayya and Kulthum. Because of Islam, because of his nephew sallallahu alaihi wasallam becoming a prophet, teaching the people about Islam, Abu Lahab forces, and his wife, Imra'atu, his wife, forces their sons to divorce the very daughters of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We're not going to be attached to this very deen of yours, Islam. We don't want no strings, no attachment at all. So chaos, I want you to use your imagination here. Chaos was going on throughout these first 5 years in Mecca, in the beginning stages of Islam. Now, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam thinks of a brilliant idea. And he says, you know what? Why don't a group of you, the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, migrate from Mecca to Abyssinia, to what we call Al-Habasha, or what we call in this day and age, modern day Ethiopia. And the Prophet ﷺ tells him, or tells his group of his companions, he says, go and migrate to this land of Abyssinia or Al-Habasha. And when you migrate in this land, the reason why you go to this land is because there is a fair and just ruler. Mind you, this ruler, as we know the famous story in the seerah, is that this ruler was not a Muslim, he was a Christian ruler and a Christian king by the name of An-Najashi. And at this time he was not a Muslim, but reports did say that An-Najashi did die a Muslim, radiyallahu anhu. May Allah be pleased with him. We know that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam appointed about 80 plus of his Sahaba, radiyallahu anhum, including his daughters, and including Uthman bin Affan, radiyallahu anhu, to leave Mecca in search of a better life. Yani we're talking about refugees here. We're talking about people that are leaving their homes and their businesses because they can't face the persecution anymore and the torture anymore. So the Prophet ﷺ is telling them, you gotta leave. And they go to a land that is, as we call, a quote-unquote non-Muslim land, seeking a better life. Doesn't that sound familiar? Where we leave a Muslim land and going to a non-Muslim land to seek a better life. So the Prophet ﷺ tells them, go. And 80 plus of his companions, radiallahu anhum, male and female, leave Mecca en route to Abyssinia. News gets to the Quraysh, and one of their fine diplomats, and probably one of the best politicians that are out there. And at this time, he was not a Muslim, and his name goes by Amr bin al-As, radiallahu anhu. At this time, he was not a Muslim. This guy was very strategic, dear brothers and sisters. And he heard the news that some of the Muslims wanted to leave Mecca and go and seek a better life in another land. He was like, no, we're not going to have that. You see, dear brothers and sisters, when non-Muslims come up to you sometimes, and they tell you and they say, you know what, why don't you go back to your country? Some of us have heard that before. Some of us have family members that have heard that before. Maybe they get mad at us, for example, whatever it may be, and they tell us, why don't you go back to your country? Wallahi, thumma wallahi, if all of the Muslims left America right now and we went back to our country, they would still not like us. They would still not like us. And you can see what the enemies of Islam are doing today, where they are destroying the Muslim lands, but that's not it. We got to go to other Muslim lands and destroy it as well, because they don't like what we have, and that is Islam. Amr bin al-As radiallahu anhu showed us that if they left Mecca, he could have said, good riddance to you. Oh Muslims, we don't want you in our society. But what did the Quraysh tell him to do? Amr, go follow them to Abyssinia. We can't let Islam prevail. We cannot let this religion of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam continue, because it will cause havoc throughout the land. This is what they believed. So Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu, with his advanced technology and the wealth that he had compared to the wealth that the Muslims had, he arrived much faster than the Muslims arrived to Abyssinia. So he got there a long time before the Muslims got there. They were a lot more poor. They didn't have wealth as much as Amr had radiallahu anhu. So he got there a lot faster than they did. When he arrived, like I said, he was a great politician and great strategist. He went to the delegates and the VIP, or the important people of Abyssinia, which were the delegates or representatives of the king. He went to them and bribed them with gifts. And he told them, there are going to be people coming from my land, Mecca, and they are going to cause havoc in your land. They are going to corrupt your society. They are immoral people. They are the fools and the slaves, wal-'iyadhu billah, of Mecca. Don't let them in your country. Don't let them in your land. And long story short, the Muslims arrive in Abyssinia, and An-Najashi, as the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam tells us, that An-Najashi was a fair and just king, so he wanted to hear them out. Although his delegates did tell him, although the people around the king did tell him that the famous diplomat Amr bin al-As radiallahu anhu told us about these people, about these 80 plus Meccans that are coming. They are no good, O king. But the king, per the saying of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was a fair and just king. So he wanted to hear them out. So he asked them a question, dear brothers and sisters, that I want to ask you right now. And I want to ask you, and I'm pretty sure, dear brothers and sisters, you've been asked this by your coworkers, by your colleagues, or perhaps non-Muslims that you have met at every single day, a part of your life. Us living in America, alhamdulillah.